I'm going to mention this book a little bit because it's wonderful. It comes with some patterns inside, and my hands are just dyed this way. They're not going to make marks on the page, but really beautiful design. See, like the little birds and stuff and flowers. Very nice. And so I would highly recommend this quilting book if you're interested in quilting. And I've been eating some of these magenta seedless grapes, red grapes, and they are sweet. They are lovely. But I would rather have grapes with seeds in them, honestly. But anyway, I guess I can leave that sentence there. Do you want to talk about Poverty Point at all?
What do you want to know?
I don't know. What do you want to
Do you
talk?
remember much about it?
No.
Oh, you're kidding?
Nope.
Okay.
I didn't write down stuff because I figured, oh, James already knows about this.
Well, you forget stuff. I mean, I did the study back, I think, the fall of 1209, so almost 10 years ago. So I've forgotten some of the details, but the important stuff I think I can remember, the stuff that's important for my kind of research. So we had to do a presentation and a paper on a number of given sites. There may be 24 or something like that for the whole class. There's going to be some duplication. Of course, it's supposed to be combined presentation. And the presentation I did, I combined with a couple other people, and they were pretty unsatisfactory. Anyway, that's kind of a side note. But what I wanted to do was find a place that would have been most susceptible to at least a certain type of catastrophism, which would be coastal flooding. And if stuff didn't occur like that, I wouldn't have been able to find anything, right? So there was only one place that was low. Two places possibly, but the one was in the Pacific, and Pacific isn't like of lowlands. It's like rising. It rises precipitously out of the Pacific Ocean, the Pacific coastline does. So the only place of all these 24 that at all fit the bill was Poverty Point, and it's not on the coast. I was going, geez, it's in northern Louisiana. Southern Louisiana is where you got the Delta of the Mississippi. It's a whole state away from the Delta of the Mississippi, and I'm going, geez, this is going to be a boring project. I'll get nothing out of it. So I start researching it, and I'm going, wow, it's an interesting era, because what I've found with the use of dendrochronology revised, although I haven't been able to revise it officially, is that the world's trees stopped growing at, the way dendrochronologists say is 2350 for, 8 years, and 1650 for 5 years, and 1150 for 18 years. Now that one's an interesting thing. 18 years. World's trees stop growing. The world's food crops kind of have a little trouble growing too. Just a little bit of trouble, and civilizations based on those food crops would have a little trouble too. So you think stuff like that would show up in the historical record. And when I first saw those dates, I'm going, wow, that sure disagrees with what I've come up with. And I was going, the dates that I've got are 1850, 1150, and 650. And then I'm going, well, hell. You see, with these dendrochronologists, what had happened is they had a fixed chronology that was based on the chronology that we've got nowadays on, this is tree rings dendrochronology, present day tree rings, going back to about a little bit before the time of Christ. And then they had a gap, what they saw as a gap. And then they had floating chronology. So this was in Belfast and in Germany. And the world's leading expert on it was saying, geez, there could be an overlap where they had this gap. But of course it couldn't be too much. And I'm going, what's of course, buddy? Because of course is not determined by by our own preconceptions, but it should be determined by the data. And so I was going, yeah, that overlap might be interesting, Because what I noticed was the difference between those 3 dates that the dendrochronologists had for the world's trees stopping growing was 2300 minus 1650, which is 700 years. Hold on to that. And then 1150 to 650, which is 500 years, which is exactly the same two differences that I had between 1850 and 1150, 700 years, and 1150 and 650. 500 years. And the important thing is what I was working with was the Mesopotamian chronology, which is not a floating chronology. It is fixed. They've got a floating chronology for that stuff, and they don't realize how much the overlap has to be. It has to be 500 years. In other words, 2350 minus 500 is 1850, the date I get with Mesopotamian data. And then 1650 minus 500, which is 1150, the date I get with Mesopotamian data, fixed chronology. And then 1150 minus 650 is 500 years. Again, the 650 is what I get with the Mesopotamian chronology. So I'm looking at this poverty point thing, and here's what the excavator was writing. And this is relatively recent, roughly around the turn of the millennium. So around 2000. And he's a recent excavator, maybe the most recent. And he's saying what ended Poverty Point way up in the northern part of Louisiana, a whole state essentially away from the Gulf of Mexico, is a huge flood. And what he said was basically, don't have any misconception about this. This is not the kind of flooding that you'd see with a hurricane. Not the kind of flooding that we've seen in what we think of as recorded history. It would be a huge flood now. From what I can tell, he's thinking it was a terrestrial flood coming from upstream. Well, yeah, the way I'd see it is it's coming from the Gulf of Mexico with some sort of impact from a piece of a comet or a meteorite. And it wouldn't have to be that large of a piece of a comet or that large of a meteorite. Around the same time, I hadn't known about it. I only found out about it recently. Is they found various impact sites on the ocean floor and the floors of various seas that show every sign of being either meteorite impacts or impacts of pieces of comets or comets. And one of the things that they found was a place. I'm making a prediction as to the dating for it, but it is in the, as I recall, in the Gulf of Mexico, just off the Yucatan Peninsula. And I'm predicting that it'll date to approximately 700 BC. It'd be closer to 650 BC exact dating, but when you're dating using radiocarbon dating, the margin of error would take care of the discrepancy. But at any rate, when did they date this end of Poverty Point? Roughly 700 BC, radiocarbon dating. And for that era, it's relatively accurate. It might be inflated a little bit. So 650, it's basically where I expected it, and it was, shall we say, monumental. It wouldn't have been magnificent, especially if you were in the neighborhood. Here's what the excavator says. He says that around that time, before 700 BC, before this flood event, the Ohio River, which forms the boundary between the state of Ohio, which is on the southern shore of Lake Erie, the northern shore of Lake Erie is Canada, Ontario. So Ohio, the Ohio River is basically kind of like a northern river, at most a middle river. It's probably the boundary, we'd say, between the northern states, or state, in this case, Ohio. There's just one northern state until you get to Canada, and the southern states. But there are 3 southern states south of it. There's Kentucky and Tennessee, and then there's Mississippi on the eastern side of the Mississippi River. But what he says is, before 700 BC, right before this flood event, the Ohio River debouched into the Mississippi around Poverty Point, around the northern part of Louisiana. Something changed its path severely. Now, when we're talking about floodplains, you can have changes even under relatively ordinary circumstances. For example, the Huang Ho, the Yellow River in China, in historical times, it's been documented, used to debouch into, I think they'd call it the Yellow Sea, what do they call it, Huang Hai or something like that in Mandarin, and south of the Shandong Peninsula. But now it debouches north of the Shandong Peninsula. So, and I don't think anything major league caused that to change, but that's on a floodplain. The Ohio River, yeah, it's kind of like on a floodplain where it debouches. But when they're thinking that it was terrestrial flooding that caused the change in the river, I'm going, that's interesting. It could happen. It could happen that mud coming down from the north would move the Ohio River's debouchement into the Mississippi north. And that doesn't seem to make much sense. Doesn't it make a little more sense to have mud coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, or by a flood coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, moving mud north from the south and changing the course of the river from the south to the north? Makes a little bit more sense. It could have worked the other way. I mean, these river courses are complicated, but it kind of fits in a little bit better. So that's the most exciting thing about Poverty Point for me. And believe me, for people living there, it's the most exciting thing they ever would have experienced. All those generations. Unfortunately, some people might not have survived. I don't think they found any remnants of people dying. I think maybe they had.
Maybe they'll find them in the mud up around Ohio.
You got a point there.
Yeah.
Well, see, like there was mud. You're right. I mean, what would have happened is mud would have got deposited, and they just would have got swept ahead, and stuff like that. I never really thought about that. See, like you're a creative thinker.
Yeah.
And
that's why it keeps me around.
Yeah. I mean, of course, they won't draw the connections. You know, they'll find, they'll say, there's a huge mud layer laid down. This would be much earlier, about 1850. It's, of course, not when they date it. They date it to 2350 because they use radiocarbon dating and they calibrate in order to please the Egyptologists. I don't believe in pleasing Egyptologists because they've been pleased too much, and as a result, they just expect to get pleasured more and more and more and more. Their demands are endless. But it was 1850. And well, they had actually dated even early. I think it's the end of the early dynastic one. And it's, how much mud is it? This is on the head of the Persian Gulf near present-day Basra. It's a ruin mound called Ur, and the guy excavating it was digging down through. He ran out of city, and he kept his workers digging. And after 9 feet of digging, that's about 3 meters of digging, they found more city. And it looks as though that intervening layer, sterile layer, was laid down by water. So it was mud at one point in time. And something, you know, the wave that hit and ended on my redating with the Ur-3 dynasty, ended the Sumerian civilization. It was not 9 feet high. It wasn't 3 meters high. It was enough water to move that much mud. It would have been incredible. Not coincidentally, the people who are finding stuff on ocean floors, remnants of meteorite or asteroid or comet hits on the ocean or on the floors of oceans, the floors of seas, found a huge one in the Persian Gulf. And I'm predicting, on the Persian Gulf, I'm predicting that that's the one. Now the deal is, here's the deal. When you've got a meteorite, it doesn't have to be that big, smaller than a city block, hitting a piece of water like the ocean, the waves are not a couple of meters high. They're not 3 meters high. At point of impact, they are several kilometers high. And if that impact that they found on the floor of the Persian Gulf occurred at that time, what the ancient Sumerians would have seen, because they would have been just basically up, not upstream, but up north of that, just not too many kilometers away, they would have seen something coming at them, conceivably kilometers high, and hence that much mud. But what the archaeologists say, we find we find mud layers all the way up to Baghdad, but they're different mud layers from different times. Yeah, tell me another one, bozos. It's the same big flood.
All right, so I'm going to show you this. This is the little Atalfo mango thing that I took out, and it's getting kind of shrivelly because I took it out the day before yesterday, and I should have planted it right away. It's not happy. And this one, see, it's got bottom is kind of munched up, so it's not great to show you. I'll show you another one later, but look how much bigger this one is because it's from a regular mango. So that's that.